Thank you very much. Now we're going to talk about policy, legal frameworks, and I don't think there's people better than the people before me to discuss these things. So I'll just roll it out, and I'll start with Etta. And Etta, my question is, why biophilic development is economically and socially viable? And I ask that because I'm sure this probably was covered yesterday, but many of us, it was the first time you interacted with, why am I saying many of us? Many of you, it was the first time you interacted with the word biophilic. And now we're talking about why biophilic development is economically and socially viable.
Hello. Thank you, Nashon, and the panel, and Wangui. Congratulations. I will simplify it in that when you're looking at investment in real estate is a heavy asset. So you spend a lot of money and a lot of time to get a project going. But remember, that's only 10% of the project's lifespan. So the project, yes, you're there as a developer, you're an architect, you think it's taken all your life to get the project done, but that's just the beginning. Once the project is alive and living in its location, it's going to be there for a long time. It's very rare that projects get demolished. I know we have engineers in the room, and you design to like a 50-year, an 80-year, even nature-based solutions, you do like a 100-year flood. But actually, buildings are built to last generations. And so in this economic climate and in this climate change aware world, if you don't design with respect to nature, you'll end up having to have either some unforeseen insurance costs, unforeseen maintenance costs, which then begin to affect your economic return. And so before we used to do sustainable design because, we were told by the funders, or we are told you must follow some rules, or the market thinks this green tag looks very nice. But now when you're doing your financial modeling, you're structuring the project, if you don't consider how this building will survive and withstand climatic hazards, then you're actually designing the building to fail on the real estate and economic side. On the other hand, there's the social viability, which is this building is living in a community. It needs to be accepted by the community. It needs to be loved by the community. It needs to be loved by its owners. And in this world, again, it's the post-technology world. People want to love the places that they live. It's a lot to do with how we are all taking photos of ourselves and our buildings. It's also post-COVID where people spend more time indoors. Their work is indoors. The school is indoors. And so the buildings that we're building in the urban environments are also what is the fabric of the communities that we're creating. And so by finding nature-based solutions or biophilia or sustainability, you find that you can create what I call cost-neutral additions and amendments to your design that can enhance economic viability and social viability. So the first is that it actually, in the long run, cost-neutral, which means it might have a bit of a capital cost now, but over time, you're reducing your maintenance. You don't have to paint the building if you use natural materials like earth or stone that's not painted. So you have lower long-term maintenance cost, even if you think that the cost is high now. By having what I call nature is a free material, like especially in Nairobi where the climate is okay. You can just plant something on the side of that wall, and it will grow and it will thrive. So how do you design in such a way that you can use cost-neutral measures to bring nature, and nature in two ways. One, in an actual bringing more natural materials into the environment. So you're walling, you're adding nature and not plants, as well as adding, making sure you have natural lighting and ventilation, and also timber and warmth into the building. But the second way is using natural systems to be more efficient with how you run the buildings. And so there's no doubt that it has always been more economically and socially viable to build using nature and to build using natural materials. It's just that there was a period during industrialization and urbanization that we thought that the money would not be enough. And we wanted to build really fast. And now the world is shifting. is shifting to say, you know what, these buildings are in our societies for long, they need to take care of us, they need to be healthy, and that way, doing this, building in biophilia, sustainability is more commercially viable. But I'll do a caveat, because I'm an architect, but I'm also a housing developer. You must build in those numbers into your model in the beginning. You can't just sort of say, oh, I want to build here, this is what I want to design, and be like, oh yeah, I'll stick in 10% for sustainability, because that's the first thing that comes out. You have to build in the fact that it might be cost 10% more, but it will save you 15% in long-term costs. So if you build it in, then it's much harder for it to be taken away by the length and the stress of project delivery. Thank you.
Wow. So I mean, let me just do a follow-up to that. And you raised a fundamental issue that I was going to point out. That you are an architect. And I say that in the context of what we're seeing around. I mean, look at our built environment. It is surrounded by what I would call probably blasphemous greed, if I may. Is it too early to talk about this in the context of our real estate built environment? Are we seeing that we are not yet here as an industry? Yes, there's a viability socially and economically, but then why are we struggling to see this obvious thing? Why are our developers, our built environment as a whole, both professionals, all the stakeholders in it, why are we so much driven with probably the greed side and not the viability, both economic and social of it, which, as you say, as fundamental benefits, are we just impatient to wait for the long-term returns of this?
I think it's a good question. There's two answers to it. One is what Roy was saying earlier in the previous panel, which is many times we don't have data at the right time in the project to make the right decisions. So if you go and look at our wonderful city, sometimes you look at a building, and the building that you're saying is blasphemous, or let's call it unaesthetic. I don't know what's the right diplomatic word. I'm not naming architects. I'm not naming anyone's buildings. I'm saying there's some buildings you look at and you're like, oh, why? But the building probably cost more to build than a building that would have been naturally designed, naturally ventilated, beautiful, and like all those things. So we look at buildings out in the city, and we just assume that if it was better designed, or if it was more naturally, has biophilic design, has sustainability, it would cost more. But that's not really true. The issue is that at the time that you're doing your design, the architect, and I'm saying this because I'm blessed to be an architect who's done development finance. So at the time you're sitting with the client comes, the developer comes with his idea of his budget, and he tells the architect the brief. The architect does the brief, and then at some point we meet together at the project site, right? But at every single point in a project, there's a finance decision. There's a budget decision. And at that drawing table, you need to bring in the client, his development model, the architect, so that you can actually, instead of sort of designing to a mental brief, you design to the project's outcomes, and you plot that building and its financial considerations in its site. So in answer to your question, the first is that people have information, but they don't have the right information at the right stage in the project to make decisions that would help them make their project commercially viable, socially viable, and also beautiful and aesthetic and biophilic. The second reason is what you pointed out. It's impatience. Because of how we run our projects, and because we don't have a strong enforcement system, like in developed countries, the developer is king, the financier is king. Sometimes it's not even developer, it's like the landowner is king, right? And they come, they pull in the architect when they need, and they're like, okay, thank you for the drawings. Then they go here, oh, Nema, I'm needed an EIA. Then they pull an EIA, tell them, haraka 50K. And then they pull out, and then they bring in the QS, and they pull out, then they bring in not even a contractor, they bring in a foreman, and that's how buildings are done. And because of this intermittent, participation of consultants, and it's not that they don't participate at all, it's just so intermittent and disconnected, that, and it's because of the impatience. I have the money, it's burning my pocket, I need to build, I need to exit. And sometimes the projects take the same amount of time. Because the professionals are just sort of like piecemeal, and there's an impatient way that we want to deliver projects, we don't want people to know too much information. What happens is that the outcome, and that's the sad part, is that the client has this outcome, and I call them the hidden developers, and they don't want to say that's their building. Yeah, they want to have the money because that was their goal, but they don't want to identify that because they're like, you know what, I don't want to identify with that because the goal was just to make money from it. And so there's impatience in how we want to deliver projects. And I'll caveat to say, as my first point, is that even with impatient clients, the projects still take the same amount of time. And the outcome is just worse. So I think either the improvement of the enforcement to ensure that clients and consultants and everyone is participating at the table at the same time, that's one way. Another way is consultants working more in consortiums so that they can offer clients sort of like holistic support in the project without feeling like they have to be contracted each time. I think is one way we can begin to move away from this impatient development processes.
Wonderful. And you've mentioned something that takes me to Mr. Matheka, and that is enforcement. And I talk about enforcement, again, in the context of our country, for example, or say the global south countries. What are the legal frameworks? I know we talk about the policy and legal frameworks. What are the legal frameworks they're looking at, Mr. Matheka, that allow us to do this kind of generative developments?
Thank you, Nashon, for that. I want to also discuss about the very legal frameworks that we are talking about. I think as a country, and specifically as a sector, we need to realize that there are two sets of laws, two sets. And this is provided for in our constitution. We have the local laws, what we call the national laws that we have as a country. But we have also an obligation of adoption of the international law that we have. There are quite a number of different international organizations and bodies that Kenya has entered into, starting with the UN systems, the ILO systems, and others. All these bodies at an international and a global level have some level of engagement for us as a country. So every sector, among the 10 sectors that we have as a country, each sector has an obligation to ensure that you not just develop the local standards or what we call the national legislations. You also have an obligation as a sector to adopt as much as possible at a global scene. And the reason is tied up to how you bring investment into your sector. And therefore, for us as building and construction sector, we have been very much inclined to ensure that we bring on board and we be part of the global community as much as possible. This may not be much informed in terms of members of public, but it is a targeted move to see how best members of public or Kenyans or professionals in our field could harness the potential and opportunities that come with such kind of adoption of international treaties. I want to confirm that in the last 1 year, because this is a space that we have been very keen on, especially in relations to climate actions and building and construction sector. We have seen Kenyans tap business opportunities at a global level. I would confirm quite a number. I could also confirm that there are several organizations that have supported this country. In fact, for the last 3 to 4 weeks, thereabout, there are a lot of business opportunities that are coming into our sector. This is part of an extended implementation of that space. And therefore, for us, and these opportunities, when they come to our country or they are with us here, it is upon each and every one of you to tap into it, bid for it, because this is a new area. We may have some of us who are a bit more informed than the rest. And therefore, the encouragement is that when we have these international opportunities arising from government commitments into these global entities and organizations that have treaties and conventions, let's see that as an opportunity for us in the building and construction sector. And I personally believe that we have enough of the professionals to tap into we have enough of the experienced persons, even here in this room, to be international consultants in the first place. And I always challenge my colleagues. We have 2 international UN agencies here in Kenya. Yeah, the UNEP, which is the one responsible for what we call biodiversity and nature-based solutions, is housed here in Kenya. How much as a sector have we engaged UNEP? How much as a sector have we engaged UN Habitat? Because that's the second one. And these 2 entities purely have special focus. For instance, like the UNEP, UN Habitat. UN Habitat is purely on issues relating to human habitation. And the idea relating to housing. Housing is a global conversation, and a special UN entity was established called UN Habitat for that purpose. So how much are we engaging UNEP, not just as government on our end, because I believe there's enough structure to that effect, as organizations, as institutions. That is an example of how best we could harness the international conventions and treaties that various sectors, including our building and construction sector, have engaged into. And therefore, the call here is that every opportunity that arises from the international community is upon us to tap into it and see how we could earn dollars. And I think that's how we can easily contribute to the GDP in a different way altogether. But then we have the local laws that we have as a country. I don't know whether you people are aware that we have not less than 40 different legislations that govern the building and construction sector. All these different legislations. And that's why typically if you ask any Kenyan, how many, name 10 laws, that it's hard to get into that. These laws are spread in the various sectors. And this is the most unfortunate thing, and I've been having conversation around this. Because if you talk about other sectors, like the judicial system or even the health systems, the laws in that sector are from within that sector. For heaven's sake, the 41 laws that we have or legislations that we have for purposes of development, regulation and development of the building and construction sector, some of them are spread as far as labor issues. Yeah, a typical student may not really need to, may not even understand where these laws are domiciled in the first place. So that informs how poorly we are managing enforcements. Because even as an enforcement officer, even in a county, you are required to read all those 40-something laws. Now, the 42nd one was actually the new building code that we have. But you are supposed to read all those laws spread from public health to, NEMA and all those kind of legislations that we have. So it becomes even hard for us as a country to really have proper enforcement mechanisms, whereas we have those kind of spread legislations in all that. And this is now where I would like to pick it up. We have the counties in place. You're all aware that matters relating to building and construction is a devolved function. And it is the duty of our subnationals to see that the standards, all the 41 standards and even more, are complied with. And that compliance comes in form of enforcement. So I think there is need for us to see how best we can harmonize our standards so that it becomes even easier to enforce, even easier to, have ourselves tap into the business opportunities, because the laws laws actually exist to provide business opportunities. I don't know whether if we evaluate the 41 laws or the 41 regulations that we have, provide that enabling business opportunity and investment for the built environment professionals. And therefore, enforcement is something that is very dear to us, and we believe that it can only come, one, if we reorganize and work around as a sector the very governing laws and legislations that goes into this. The idea of enforcement is not to punish people. It is just to create order, just like any other legislation. And therefore, will be keen to see that the enabling frameworks, the enabling policies are aligned, are also reorganized in a manner that they support the sector, they support the professionals, and even support investment that the industry should go into. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think the key thing there is reorganization, because I think that's our Waterloo in the built environment. If you look at the number of regulations that we have, sometimes I think it's deliberate to just lose you on the way. so that people get away with this, some of the shortcuts? Is it time, and this is historical, Matheka, is it time that we deliberately form the regulation around this kind, a very specific one, that allows us to build sustainably and build this kind of regenerative developments? I think it's high time we look keenly as an industry and probably as a government. But I want to go to faucets. And Mr. President, for these days, we really cast planners. In fact, we're in the rainy seasons. Whenever rainy seasons around, personally, I walk and the first thing I say is, I'm not a planner because of the issues we are facing. The role of planners in this, how do we translate policy? It looks like we have a lot of it. We have a lot of it. We are not short of these policy documents. How do you translate these policies and talk about the role of planners in spatial planning so that we begin to see the difference and realization of this kind of developments?
Thank you. Thank you, Nashon. Am I audible? Is my mic working? Is it working? Yes. Thank you. I'm here to talk about planning and to defend planners. And that sounds like a very nasty oxymoron, isn't it? Defending planners and, yeah. Look, we have many laws, as Matheka has said, a number of policies, 40, 50. But the gap that we still have in this country is the gap of planning. Kenya has not been planned at all, okay? So to the extent that we talk about enforcement, we ask about enforcement of what? The type of enforcement, I believe the type that Matheka is talking about, is enforcement that is done by the police, where they ensure that everybody follows the law. And then there are, of course, courts of law to implement that type of enforcement. But in the built environment, the only thing that we need typically to enforce are the laws and, of course, the Constitution that compels the government to plan. And the government has shied away from planning. So if you ask me to what percentage is Kenya planned, I would probably tell you maybe 1 or 2%. 98% of the time, we grow organically without any guided form of development. And it's strange because we typically go benchmarking in the Western countries and to see how well they do their thing. And we come back and we say, we are quite ahead, we have so many laws. Yes, we have so many laws, but those laws in themselves mean nothing if we have no plans. Most recently, let me give you a practical example. Nairobi City County called for public participation on what they called development control policy. How many of us saw that? We are all in the built environment space, I believe most of us. How many are aware that Nairobi City County called for public participation on development control policy? 1, 2, and they are planners. Yeah? Oh, the third one is not a planner. Perhaps a planner as well? Okay. Now, let me give you something that's surprising. In this development control policy, the city has been partitioned into about 90 different zones. Okay? And each zone has allocated development control guidelines that guide development in them. Now, strangely enough, they have come to places such as Westlands, and they have gone to places such as Kilimani, and they've said there's lots of development coming up in Kilimani. So Kilimani should develop up to 75 floors. Nashon, you may have seen that? 75 floors. Now, they called us to go and, public participation so that we could go and say, yes, the city has done well. So as professional associations, and I would like to thank our colleagues from the Architectural Association of Kenya who joined us, we joined hands together, the Kenya Institute of Planners. We went and told off the city authorities. And we told them that, look, this type of nonsense is not going to help this country unless we go back to the basics. So because it was the National Assembly that had called for that public participation, we told the County Assembly, we told them, look, go back, allocate funds for planning, okay? And then the planners that you have at City Hall will have something to enforce. When planners have plans to enforce, then development control becomes easy. But when we have no plans and we have certain documents calling themselves development control policy, we're in a big danger of putting blame where there is no blame. And we understand. We understand because typically we are in a conference on biophilic development, isn't it? And you go around the city today and everybody else is cutting trees. You know, they cut trees, including certain people who had gone to, I think, part of City Park, where they were grabbing some school parcel, and they were still cutting trees even on grabbed school property. And you ask yourself how long this is going to continue. Now, this is going to continue for as long as we leave lots of these development decisions in the hands of politicians who look at planning and the gap that the absence of planning presents as potentially the engine that drives the gravy train of eating, and then the good old planner is right there, naive and expecting that the whole society expects good of us, not knowing that we have been converted into a punching bag, where when people talk about corruption, it's the planners. When people talk about an ugly city, a city that grows without direction, it's the planners. But look, who allocates the responsibilities on what needs to be done? It is unfortunately, the guys that we have given the responsibility called the political class.
Wow. Amazing. So look, we have the economic and social benefits, and there are some legislations towards that, but we have not planned. I mean, so this thing is beneficial, as I said. What's or not is really beneficial. And we have an enforcement issue of what we already have, but fundamentally we've not planned. And I was in a conference, I think 2 weeks ago, where you're saying in this country, save for Nairobi, that are semblance of zoning, all the other major cities don't have anything, zero. Kisumu is just zero. You build on by the grace. Hope is the method being used down there. I mean, what are we going to do? Because nature is whistling, really whistling. And at some point they say nature whistles until it screams. And I believe it's beginning to scream at us. And the need for this kind of development is not a matter we're going to exercise choice on for long. But it's like the industry is stuck. We have the political class on that side, and the president of planners tell us we are 2% of planning. So you're building by God's grace, but we know viability of it. That is the picture I want to get about. But let me go to Ali. As you ponder over these matters, I almost asked that we switch off the streaming out of the country as we discuss our internal matters. But it's gone. It's gone, guys. Ali, let me come to you. And I want to talk about the moral leadership models that govern this kind of national developments. And talk to us from look, you're from an advantage position. Based on what I'm talking about. You're in France, you're in Paris. Yes, you have your own issues. But I believe some of what you're talking about here, you are not on that pedestal. So what are the moral indigenous leadership models that govern these national developments?
Okay. That's an interesting starting point.
I am sure Paris is not 2% planned. If I'm not wrong, I haven't been there. I'm now speaking like I've been there. But I haven't been, so I'm postulating.
Okay, because from where I'm standing, actually, I wish I was with you, and I wish I was, on the African continent. From my personal experience, what I have seen is the absolute beauty of the land and how the land sings. My personal heritage from my mother's side is Malagasy, and having traveled there before, I have felt the land speak very, very loudly in so many different ways. living in Europe and in Paris, from my personal perspective, the land does not sing in the same way. There is a lot of drowning, there is a lot of noise, there is a lot of mechanical, artificial regulation of our life. So, and it is not necessarily in alignment with the natural cycle. So from that perspective, I wouldn't necessarily say that we are on a pedestal or a privileged position, at least not where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But that leads me to a follow-up question. What you've described here is sort of chaos. So are you saying that this chaos is actually similar to what you have?
Chaos is what happens before we actually come into a reordering phase. And what we are all globally experiencing is what I would call a chaotic experience. The old order of separation where we are, and when I say we, I'm generalizing here, particularly from a westernized perspective, that we human beings are separate from nature, but we are not. Nature is not outside of us, and we're not separate from nature because we are nature. We are an expression of nature. We exist because nature is. And by nature, I mean life, I mean the planet, I mean Gaia. So the first premise for us in this chaotic phase is to remember that we are nature. And that's where the ancestral, indigenous, traditional wisdoms and knowledge becomes incredibly important today. For the past few centuries, we've operated in a paradigm of separation that has led to destruction, extraction. We talk about nature as though it is completely outside, so we have all these legislation and regulation, where we are regulating nature. But nature regulates life. So we have to understand that we have been very much misled in our relationship with nature. Nature is not a resource, nature is a relation, because we are all in relation to each other. So where I'm coming from is from a nature-conscious governance perspective. And by nature-conscious governance, it's not about governing nature, but it's about understanding that our human systems, like our legal systems, our economic systems, our political systems, and so on, our human systems should be an expression of the balance and harmony that we seek to establish in nature. So we have to reintegrate the consciousness that we are an expression of this. And our ancestral knowledge, our ancestral wisdom bearers in particular, are here to remind us of that. So from the work that I have been doing with the Earth Law Center, and particularly with the Nature Governance Agency, we have been promoting the voice of nature in organizations, particularly in corporations and businesses, so that nature can be a visible stakeholder and can be integrated and involved in the decision-making processes. So the idea of having nature on board is to ensure that, for instance, if we're talking about planning, that planning is not just made from an anthropocentric perspective, but it is made from a relational, holistic, nature-conscious and nature-focused perspective. The word biophilia is such a beautiful word. I must admit that I was not overly familiar with it, so I went and did my own little bit of research, and I love looking at the meaning of words, the etymology. So biophilia, from what I understand, means the love of life. And that's what it's actually about, what we are doing here. I mean, every single one of us in this lifetime, regardless of our professional prowess and achievements, the bottom line is that when we go home at night, we go home to our families. Whatever we do is to enjoy life, is to enjoy the beauty of life, the sweetness of life, is to enjoy friendship and so on. So to have this mindset of biophilia in the way that we plan, in the way that we govern ourselves, in the way that we lead ourselves, is what I would say, it's what it is, nature-conscious governance and nature-conscious leadership. which is really looking at what matters, what really counts. Am I making sense so far?
Yes, you are. But I have a follow-up question to you, Ali, and this is my question. What moral leadership models on nature governance can we borrow or can we learn from where you are? And I'm talking in the context of France.
Oh, the context of France. Okay. I'm going to talk more from like a much broader context, if that's okay with you, because I evolve a little bit more in the English Anglophone kind of world. I'm based in Paris, but
that's okay.
I operate.
That's okay.
Okay, globally. Okay. So models of leadership. Well, the main model of leadership that I tend to promote is nature conscious leadership, which is essentially an understanding that we are the stewards of our governance system. So we have to, I know I'm repeating myself, but we have to understand that we are nature, and that comes from my personal experience. It is embedded in earth law, earth jurisprudence, wild law, for instance. So we are looking at what is the natural flow of the laws of nature. And by integrating that natural flow of the laws of nature, then we understand that we have to also operate from a responsibility-based perspective. So we can promote the rights of nature, which is the right-based framework. But on the other hand, what we have to do as individuals in terms of leadership is to step in as responsible beings, the ability to respond to a particular situation. So the model that we have been using, for instance, internally, is looking at the 8 ecological principles of responsibility, that is, asking ourselves in the decision-making process whether, the action or the plan that we have in mind is regenerative. Is it about reintegrating ourselves within the web of life? Is it reciprocal? Is it relational? Are we replenishing, the community or the communities? And by communities, we don't mean just human communities, but tree communities, water communities, soil communities. We're looking at as well at restoration. So in terms of models, I would focus first on principles and values and seek inspiration from different ancestral traditions. So for instance, from Latin America, we're looking at the concept of buen vivir. Sorry for my pronunciation, I don't think it's actually very good. Again, I'm generalizing here, but from an African perspective, we are looking at the concept of Ubuntu, which is articulated in different ways in different parts of the African continent. In Europe, that would be the concept of solidarity. So leadership in that sense is about leading into the future in a way that is with integrity, that is the quality of being integrated and aligned with our thoughts, our words, and our deeds.
Thank you.
Answering your question.
Yes, you are. And thank you so much for that wonderful question. Etta, I want to come to you in a minute. I can see my time is running out. Ubuntu, I mean, that is something we hear it when you're young, all the way until now. Someone told me, I think last week, because this conference is coming up, and the question was, what is our architectural language? And I want to speak to you as an architect, that we've lost our African identity in design. I mean, how do we align our African values, African identity? How do we return the spirituality of the land? Because I believe someone, again, an architect told me the old African design was better biophilic than what we have. But then we've evolved, our population is growing, we have to be, the reality is we are not going back to thatched houses in Nairobi. How do we begin to align this from an architectural perspective?
Great question. Probably wrong architect, because my whole life's purpose professionally is to solve urban affordable housing at scale through dignified density design. So I would say that it's It's a great question, but I don't think it should distort from the context of the problem that somebody's trying to solve. So if you are looking to solve affordable housing in urban context using dignified density design, on my end, our African identity is finding a way to do density in urban context so that housing is affordable and accessible to the communities who need it without it losing the way that we live. So when you're living in a city, I'm one of 7 and a twin, yes. You can tell from my personality. But I'm one of 7, I'm a twin, and we've lived in Nairobi my whole life, but we've never lived in a house bigger than a 3-bedroom or an apartment bigger than a 3-bedroom. And it was fine. Like, it was okay. You fight by the sink. You don't need ensuite, 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 ensuite. I mean, like, it's like you survive. You're okay. And many families, one of 7, one of 5, they live in single-room occupancies. We're doing a research. ZIMA-SHOUT is doing research with the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, studying tenements in pipeline, and Zimmerman with Joanne there. We have a planner. And people want to live the way that they want to live in Western and village, but they just come to the city to work. So how can we house our urban workforce without having to let people compromise the way they live? Simple things, when you look at the principles of African architecture, relates to where you orient your doors in an apartment that's compact. How do you make sure that the man of the house doesn't feel like he's compromised? Yeah? How do you make sure that the women in the house don't feel like they're next to the ankle? Like, there's some principles in how we used to design our African traditional architecture in low density situations, which, as I said, don't over romanticize and say we're going to do an apartment thatch thing. No. You have to sort of say, okay, how are we going to house our urban workforce? People are here to work. And in a way that doesn't compromise the way that they want to live. The second part to that question relates to sort of my first preamble on the problems with how, the problems of the delivery of our urban context. And it is that the people in this room, I admire all of you, but we are preaching to ourselves, right? We all like this stuff and we know what's happening. But when you go out there, the people who are building, the clients, the landowners, they're not going to seek technical professionals. And if they're going to seek them, they're not going to pay for them for that value. So when it comes to urban affordable housing and sustainable design, we need to move towards open source models so that we can scale the impact we're trying to do. So at ZIMA and at ZIMA-SHOUT, we've developed 3 housing typologies: the apartment complex, the row house, and the adult hostel co-sharing living, to sort of solve the urban affordable housing crisis. But the point is that we have piloted this project and then we are open sourcing. And not open sourcing in a romantic way, no. Like floor plans, technical specs, BOQs, so that if somebody wants to take ZIMA and build it elsewhere, they don't have to go through 10% of your project cost. They don't have to find, myself, who's like, I've been studying for like 20 years. They just have to take the information, and that means that our cities the technical professionals is not a barrier to building better. So like that open sourcing will enable the democratization of access to information that can make people with the money, people with the land, know what to build. And also have the options to sort of say, I can afford this, I can't afford this, or this is how the people have been living like this. Can I adjust it here? Will I be able to afford that? And that avoids what actually happens in the built environment. I'm not sure what the percent is. I can't see anyone from AAK here, but most of the built environment is like less than 1% consulted by professionals. So it means that we are not, all the impact and the planners, and it doesn't actually matter. They will not come, right? But if they had the capacity to engage with consultants without the fear of the cost, what would happen to the built environment? And then, and thinking as a consultant, I'm not saying go and work for free. I'm saying, what will happen if there's a population who realize the value of the consultants in their projects, right? It creates that sort of ripple effect. And the third way, I know I'm sort of deviating from your question on, how do we identify with our African identity, not really deviate, because African societies and traditional societies, even emerging markets versus the wonderful developed countries of Paris, we strive for efficiency. We want lower power bills. We want lower water bills. Like if you tell somebody the numbers correctly, they'll be like, of course, put the solar, because for them the math makes sense. It's just about when the capital comes in. So when you're building and designing your projects, either from the development side or from the architect side, you can split the biophilic, African identity, the stuff that actually makes us who we are, natural lighting, natural ventilation, nature-based solutions for your water and waste and power systems, almost split it and do the work of costing it. And these days, there's a lot of funds and funders who will fund that in parallel. So you can do a solar program on an affordable housing project, and as long as you build into your development model a power purchase agreement with that person who's providing the solar at the capital cost, you can actually build in these biophilic aspects and sustainability aspects and have them pre-funded in parallel so that you're not mixing the problems. And so there's different ways of splitting the problem so that you can have it easier for the client and the developer to know how to integrate these systems into their projects. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Wow. I should have asked you to speak as a developer, not an architect. Lesson learned.
I'm glad you've learned that lesson.
First, let me come to you, because I want to come to Matheka last. In this case, he's a government, so we're going to punch him a bit at the end. There's a lot of doom. You spread a lot of doom, and it's rightfully so, by the way, rightfully so. There's something is done. But what do we need to do from a planning perspective? And speakers, you're not just a planner, you're also the president of the Institute of Planners in this country. What needs to happen? Because something needs to rob. And Etta says, you look at this room, probably we don't have the decision makers in this room, unless you're calling me one of them, which I'll accept. But what do we need to do so that we begin to make this imperative impact that is required for our country from planning perspective?
Thank you. On the same subject, I had prepared about a 30-slide PowerPoint, which I have not had an opportunity to present. But let me say this, that the development question is more, just like technology in the software, much more than in the hardware. The hardware, in this particular case, is the product of what we have in the software. We are saying we are revisiting African culture, but I hear people are asked to put on African wear, and I cannot see any African wear in here, though I see some African print beautiful dresses.
I wasn't asked, let me...
Well, you are a latecomer. The thing is, what is African culture? How many of us are practicing African culture, right? I think many of us will be embarrassed that we have been so far removed from our culture that we are anywhere between, we are not yet westernized. In fact, we are not westernized, we are African by name and by location, but African culture is gone. I think this comes as a very sad conclusion of the matter, but African culture is gone. The only thing that we could do about it is to find ways of resurrecting any dregs of the culture that we can have and develop frameworks for curating whatever will have been left. Otherwise, you give us another 50 years, then it will be difficult to get to know what we really were, unless perhaps we visit the museums and maybe libraries, which also do not curate some of these things properly. Because the current education that we get in the planning school, in the School of Architecture, it's all Western education. We are trained in the Eurocentric theoretical models. the technology that we have is Western, or is Eurocentric, sorry. So how do we go back? For the Christians in the house, the Bible talks about going back to the old pathways. For those who have read the book of Jeremiah, the old pathways for us in this case are long lost. And that's the prognosis. So all we have to do is to think about going back to our educational model. And CBC is quite good at that. Even though, again, the design of the curriculum, CBC itself has its own shortcomings. We saw the type of presentation that we had here, fantastic, visionary type of education. But who among us can afford the type of education that was presented by our two panelists during the day? Perhaps 1% of us, right? Because that level of education has become very expensive. And not many of us are able to get to it. So from a planning point of view, we, for the renewal or a rewriting of the planning education curriculum. But this again is also a bit ironic because I also work at the university where we're supposed to develop this curriculum. But a curriculum is not something that you're going to wake up today and you're going to decide that, look, let's have this in the curriculum, let's not have this in the curriculum. It's going to be tested or measured against what they teach in Harvard and at MIT and wherever in America or in Europe. So the unfortunate situation is whatever has been there is lost, this unfortunate situation. But thanks to conferences such as this, in as much as we are preaching to the converted, at least we are able to canvass some of these ideas. And then somebody is going to ask the question, what was vernacular architecture? Then somebody is going to go back to start curating vernacular architecture. In Kenya, we are talking about 70 different types of architecture. From the Luo to the Luya to, those architectures are different, right? So if we would curate all this, the Bomas tried something, but it was too miniaturized, and perhaps it was covered in lots of Western values that it perhaps got, it lost whatever it was supposed to serve. So the education has to be changed. The manner in which professionals, engineers, architects, planners, the way we are trained has to change, and we have to go back to class to learn. First of all, we learn our mother tongue, because if you do not know your mother tongue, then you have no right of saying that we have African cultures that should be brought back. No, go back first of all and learn your mother tongue, and then let's come and start discussing the great ideas of Ubuntu, right? And I think that then gives us then the leverage of speaking openly to each other, and then we open the books and begin to talk about the issues that matter. But we have to go back to the basics: education, culture, society. Then, of course, the laws will follow.
Wow. Coming from a planner, learn your mother tongue. It's the first step of planning, by the way. Mr. Matheka, and then I will close with Ali, and I want to give you a minute. By the way, Wangui, the next conference, let's do it. Let's get a space, open space at State House. Then we can host next year's Biophilic conference, State House ground. We want to preach to the unconverted. That's what the planners are saying. Let's go to where we need to win souls, right? We need to win souls. So State Department, Ministry of Housing, Urban, are a very big parking space. Matheka, I know, I've been there. We can do a big tent there and have a conference next year. Mr. Matheka, I'll put you on the spot on this because you're government in this space. It seems like everything just points back to where you guys are. Okay? It's just directed because end of the day, Article 43(1)(b) of the Constitution, you read it in its context, the right to housing and all those things. It's talk about what we're discussing here. Yeah, the framers of our constitutions had this in mind, that there was some context of adequacy. And if you read the word adequate housing in the context of United Nations, then it brings around this biophilic kind of living. you are the implementers, because 47 million of Kenyans, 50 million cannot implement. We'll have to form vigilante groups to begin implementing this in our own wherever we live. End of the day, and I put in the spot from the now devolve and national. What needs to change? The cameras are off. What needs to change?
In terms of?
Enforcement, implementation, housing.
Okay. Let me talk about affordable housing, because I think that is where he is headed. Now, we all understand that we have an obligation to do something across board, okay? But with a specific intention of what he's talking about. If you read the Affordable Housing Act, the last page talks about the schedules. And one of the schedule is on the various implementing agencies. I think there are 8 of them. I don't know whether you people are aware that even an SSF is an implementing agency of the affordable housing. All the 47 counties are part of the implementing agencies. Housing is just one as an implementing agency. And therefore, delivery of affordable housing is a process. And like any other government program, would expect it to take a while to pick up. The law is quite clear. In fact, I think section 46 thereabout talks about the use of local materials for local skills from the local communities. We are also coming up with regulations to further define some of those things. But of importance is that this is a new program off the levy. This is a new program that gives us an opportunity, you know, to plan it in a manner that is supposed to be. It is something that, as professionals in this field, we should embrace it. I also fought it at some point because I was part of the team that was actually conceptualizing this thing all the way from 2015. But it took a turn at some point. But of importance is that if we truly implement the affordable housing program, as a country, it will actually become an area of special attentions in quite a number of areas. They should actually become the demonstration centers of how best, the skills, the knowledge, because there are some even provisions in the building, in the Constitution, that we should also be able to demonstrate on issues of traditional knowledge, nature and biodiversity, and the rest. So the intent of the affordable housing program needs to come out from the professionals, and I think this is something that we also need to look into. I'm very particular on professionals because in other jurisdictions or in other sectors, professionals become more louder. When we hear our colleagues in the planning team talking about the frustrations, I'm very much really in doubt of a lot of things. The whole construction sector, the building and construction sector in Kenya, apparently, has one act. And that act is called the Physical and Land Use. It is actually managed by the physical planners. Are you people aware of that? Yes. So all the work that goes into the engineering, all the work that is going to the architects and everyone else, the person or the law that governs that in terms of seeking approval is actually the Plupa Act. And therefore, we need to rightfully, as professionals, take our position. And part of our position is ensuring that we get it right in terms of planning. Hata maandamano inafanya kazi. In terms, I think Nashon is aware of that. The point is that for our physical planners, you must get it right so that our architects and engineers follow suit, right? And that is a challenge I'm placing onto physical planners. Otherwise, when you talk about reorganization of the law, we can as well take that mandate of, into it. But we want you to be very proactive so that whatever is necessary in terms of, harnessing the nature-based solutions, whatever is required in the building code, whatever is required in any other legislation out there, then is first factored in at the baseline level. And this is at the physical planning level. It becomes a bit easier for us to implement national programs like the affordable housing using a framework that is working. Government will always have programs that are supposed to be implemented. But professionals, we all have an obligation over any other person to deal with that. But then I want to say something before I close. Next week, from Monday to Wednesday, there's a function, there's a conference in relation to sustainable construction Africa. These are some of the best forums that if we find an opportunity to attend, please let's do. This is where we also learn from the global best practices, what goes into this. We have always had those kind of conversations of encouraging our professionals to also learn from the peers, so that even in those kind of forums, then we'll be in a position. It's not organized by the ministries, it's actually a university organizing it, one of these universities we have. But then these are some of the forums that we look forward, ladies and gentlemen, to see that we learn, so that as we implement these kind of programs, the affordable housing, we learn from what Ghana has done. We learn from the other countries like India, what they have done in some states. And therefore, for us, let's see that this is a new baby for us. We are the people that should nurture it. Political class come and go, but we are here to stay. Thank you.
First, I don't want to respond because I saw you are eager to say something. Maybe in what? I have 0 minutes. In 30 seconds?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Matheka says that the whole thing comes back to planners, and I agree. It does come back to planners. But planners, as it were, planning, as it were, is a regulated profession. You have planning in government and you have planning in the private sector. Now, you have two powers that the government has on planning. What you call the power of eminent domain, where the government can enter into any land and plan it. Then the other one is called police power, where the government regulates your use of your land. So the whole thing comes back to government.
The whole things come back to Mr. Matheka.
Does the government have the goodwill? Planners are willing, but planning requires resources. And this is one thing that the government has refused to comprehend. And Mr. Matheka understands these things. So Mr. Matheka, the next time you guys are in the big boardrooms, and I'm glad, by the way, Nashon, you might know this, that we have been telling the government that the affordable housing program cannot continue without planning. A couple of weeks back, they finally allowed for affordable housing sites to be planned first before any design is done. Probably the next sites are going to be a lot more functional.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy. Mr. Matheka is a good friend of mine, but I didn't know he was already converted. So next time I'm speaking, I'm going to be careful how we talk about these things. Look, I've always said we need a BOMAS. We need a 3-day BOMAS conference, built environment, to canvass these issues. I know BOMAS is under renovation, so it's BOMAS in quotes. We can go anywhere. We need to really, as an industry, delve deep into these conversations. 45 minutes is not enough. Ali, let me come to you, and you're going to close for us these sessions. I just want to hear, you've had this wonderful conversation that we have here. I just want to hear your parting shots. What do you think, what needs to happen in a minute?
1 minute. I really enjoyed hearing everything that was said, and I would like to respond specifically to the idea of the doom thought, or that the culture of Africa is gone. I'm not sure if I'm interpreting it the right way. I personally do not believe in that at all. I think culture means different things to different people in different ways. Africa is a continent that has so many different countries that were delineated during the colonialist era, which does not even actually acknowledge all the richness of the different tribes and the different cultures within there. I think that the real issue here is not that things are lost, but that things are not necessarily visible. In the many conferences and interventions that I've participated in across the world, I haven't seen the African voices, I'm generalizing here, as much as all of the other voices. So what I would like to say is this: I would like more visibility for the different African voices, for the different African wisdom and traditions. You asked me earlier on about what kind of leadership models I could actually impart from Paris or France or the Western world. But the current leadership models that we have, the Eurocentric, the Westernized, the capitalist, leadership models that we have led us to where we are right now in this ecological polycrisis. Everyone who is in the realm of rights of nature, voice of nature, or ecological regenerative mission knows that we have to look at different kinds of leadership, and we have to find them in our ancestral, traditional, indigenous wisdom bearers. That is in Africa, in America, in Asia, everywhere. So what I'm saying is that I don't think we are doomed. I think we are just in a natural process of evolution. And it's like trees or seasons, you know, the leaves might have fallen, but the roots are still strong. And we are literally the manifested dreams of our ancestors. So we just have to actually fulfill our missions and be far more vocal and visible on the scene. Thank you.
I think that's a very good, hopeful note to end it. That probably we are not, it's not just all gloom and doom. The roots could still be there. That we still have our roots well grounded, though the tree looks so beaten up and withered. Unfortunately, we have to end this panel discussion. And sadly, we've not exhausted things that we need to discuss here. And the thing is, being in these panels, we never exhaust them. We always have to end because of the beautiful thing called time. But we agree on one thing. This thing is beneficial. Building sustainably, biophilic, it's beneficial for us. But we have some challenges that we are facing. Probably we are just evolving, as Ali puts it. I'm hoping so. But I think we need to put more effort to it. We need to make more noise in rightful places. And hopefully this conference going forward will begin to give us that voice that they can project to the right places and begin to continue making the noise required so that we begin to build responsibly biophilic developments that begin to spur our country and our industry. That is what we need as an industry. That's what we need as a country. That is what we need going forward. As I said, nature is whistling, and you can tell it's beginning to scream. Thank you very much to my panelists, to all of you. Unfortunately, I can't take questions from you. Time is really gone. Hopefully, we'll do that next time. Thank you very much.